Anything you can dream about here, you can make. Zero limit.
You ever see a movie that you thought was a pretty solid, fun experience from start to finish? Or maybe it moved you and touched you in a way that you didn't think was possible, and you wonder why no one is talking about it. Then you look online and realize that it's because no one saw it. Well, that has happened many times throughout film history, with a lot of these films becoming cult classics later on, usually after they hit home releases, or by people discussing it through word of mouth. Some of the most famous examples are Fight Club, Boondock Saints, John Carpenter's The Thing, Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. Hell, technically, Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo underperformed and wasn't well received by critics at the time, but now this movie is literally a contender for greatest film of all time. And you're probably thinking, wow, those movies actually flopped? Yeah, they did, which is pretty surprising. Many of them have a legacy and huge following around them, and are still talked about to this day, but upon their initial release, they flopped or just underperformed. And this is a trend that continues to this day. Many movies fly under the radar and receive little to no attention, but are actually pretty damn good. Some get lucky and get a second life on streaming, but that's not the case for all. And today, I wanted to list off and talk about several movies that have flopped and underperformed in modern day. And maybe we can find out why they flopped. Spoilers, half of it comes down to marketing. Now, I originally planned to talk about a lot of these movies in their own videos, but I figured having one longer video would be better than having several shorter ones. So strap in and relax, and let's talk about some movies that shouldn't have flopped. I want to start off with the movie that really inspired this whole video, Boy Kills World. It released last year and literally flew in under the radar, and was out of theaters just as fast as it went in. Seriously, after only like 2 weeks of being in theaters, you could have rented it at home. Then after 3 weeks, it was pulled from theaters altogether, which has been a trend from movie studios that I've been noticing these past few years. If a movie isn't doing well, they make it available to rent while it's still in theaters. It started in COVID, but now it seems they do it when a movie is underperforming, in the hopes that the convenience of watching it at home will compel people to rent it. But anyway, a buddy of mine and I were looking forward to watching it, but by the time we were able to plan something, it was already gone. And after looking at the box office, it's no surprise to why they pulled it. $3 million on a $25 million budget. Yeah, saying this flopped is an understatement. Which is a shame because this movie is balls to the wall, bloody action, wrapped in dark humor. The action scenes are mostly solid, with all the best stuff happening about halfway through. And it has such a great and unique visual style. And the humor lands for the most part. Sure, when you boil it down, it's just a revenge story about trying to take down this big, evil, rich, corrupt family that has a stranglehold on a city, but it's all about the execution. And I think that's interesting enough stylistically that it makes for a very fun viewing experience, even though you kind of have an idea of how it's going to go. But I will say the final fight and plot reveals towards the end definitely raises it a few notches for me personally. But the overall package is pretty awesome. And honestly, not a bad showcase for a first-time director. Hell, they even had Sam Raimi on as producer, as well as Bill Skarsgård in the starring role. But it appears even having their names attached to it wasn't enough to save it. So what happened? Well, the biggest thing is that it comes down to marketing really, which will be a trend in this video. You see, this is produced by Lionsgate, and they're a big studio, don't get me wrong, but they're not as big as, say, Disney or Warner Brothers or Paramount or Universal. Hell, I remember seeing an interview with Leigh Whannell, writer and co-creator of Saw and Insidious, talking about how Lionsgate basically pulled some marketing tricks to get eyes on Saw, since they weren't a giant studio, and the movie was very small and cheap. I guess not much has changed since then. So odds are they put most of their marketing into more recognizable movies that were coming out in 2024. You remember those smash hits, The Crow and Borderlands, don't you? So I think that more than likely plays a factor in this movie bombing. I don't remember seeing any interviews or clips floating around online prior to this film's release, and when it did drop, the reviews weren't raving either, and within a few weeks it was silently pulled from theaters. Now, I'm optimistic, and think this movie will have a newly found appreciation on streaming services. So yeah, in the end, Boy Kills World is a creative, bloody action film with some dark humor and unique visual style that shouldn't have flopped as bad as it did. Now, when Dungeons & Dragons Honor Amongst Thieves was first announced, I was skeptical because the previous D&D movie wasn't really that good. But more importantly, how are they going to go about adapting a tabletop RPG? It just seemed like a very tricky task. But then some news came out about the cast and crew, but more importantly, who would be writing and directing it. It was the same guys behind Spider-Man Homecoming, not only writing, but directing as well. So I immediately became more interested. After seeing the trailer, I was actually optimistic. It looked like a pretty fun time. Now, similarly to Boy Kills World, this movie also had some pretty bad marketing, but it wasn't an issue of getting interviews and pushing trailers and clips online. No, it was more so a very small thing of news articles and entertainment outlets making this movie look unappealing as possible. Basically, it was mentioned that they intentionally made Chris Pine's character, the male lead, look like a buffoon and incompetent to emasculate him. Why? I imagine some sort of like social or political message. So as a potential viewer seeing this, it made it look just unappealing. Why would I watch a movie where the lead is purposely made to look like a fool to try to score some points with certain crowds online? Well, I don't know who they were were trying to appeal to because as a result, it underperformed, making just over $200 million on its $150 million budget. Sure, not a complete failure technically, but it wasn't exactly a hit either, considering how much money is spent on marketing after the film is done. But here's the thing, the movie is actually pretty damn good. It received a lot of positive feedback from audiences and even critics, and that's what prompted me to finally check it out almost a year after its release, and I was surprised how good it was. It features some pretty damn fun and creative action sequences, blending humor and creative stunts with some top-notch camera work. It's also surprisingly funny. It's very similar to Homecoming, so a lot of the jokes do land pretty well. Just in general, I was surprised by how much I was cracking up watching this, probably because my expectations were kinda low. Overall, it was a very fun fantasy adventure, and that whole emasculating the male lead thing, yeah, it really doesn't make sense when you actually watch the movie, because if their goal was to make him look dumb and incompetent, it really didn't work, because, well, for one, it's a comedy and everyone gets jokes directed towards them at some point, so he never really felt singled out, but also, he's still the de facto leader of the movie. He makes all the decisions, he comes up with all the plans, so they didn't really do a good job at making him look like a buffoon or goofy or incompetent. So I really don't know where this came from. So it really is a shame that this movie didn't perform that well, because I would be down for a sequel, especially if it kept the same tone and style and creativity as this one. They would also have a lot of lore to play around with, so they could easily make a sequel, but I doubt that would ever happen. If you haven't checked it out, you definitely should. It's a lot of fun.
And I'll leave you guys with Vegeta.
So I actually made a video a while ago on why this movie flopped, and after seeing the film, I gotta say, I mostly hit the nail on the head. So I'm probably gonna be reiterating a lot of what I said there. But Furiosa is the prequel to Mad Max Fury Road that no one really asked for, and honestly, that's exactly why it flopped. It's a film following a character that no one really wanted to see more of. 2015's Fury Road was an excellent, badass, epic movie, and by the end, fans were sold on seeing more Mad Max films starring Tom Hardy, seeing more of the wasteland and what other crazy adventures he gets into, as well as some more wacky characters he'll have run-ins with. And then time went by, and then fast forward to nearly a decade later, and we finally get a new addition to the franchise. And it's a prequel for a character that isn't Mad Max. So after that reveal, fans were just disinterested and dissatisfied. It's just not what they wanted, plain and simple. Now with all that being said, after sitting down and watching it, I gotta say, it's pretty damn good. It doesn't lose that insanity and epicness that was presented in Fury Road. And it really is a badass roller coaster ride. The stunts and action sequences are still pretty crazy, and the vehicles are awesome. And Chris Hemsworth is such a blast to watch. I enjoy all of his scenes. Though admittedly, the focus is a bit different than Fury Road. It sets out to explore the world much more, see more of the Bullet Farm and Gas Town, as well as the crazy characters who inhabit the wasteland. And of course, following Furiosa's revenge and seeing her become the hardened badass we know in Fury Road. There's no other way to say it. It's a pretty epic movie and it's a blast. I have some issues with it. For starters, the CGI really stands out, and the runtime gets pretty damn long. But overall, it's a pretty good movie. And I think if the people who didn't have interest in it sat down and watched it, they would actually enjoy themselves. But in the end, it didn't change the fact that this simply wasn't what people wanted, and so it underperformed. I mean, yeah, it's cool basically seeing more of Fury Road and exploring that world, but what fans actually wanted was a follow-up with Tom Hardy as Mad Max. If you take a look at the numbers, it pulled in $174 million on a $168 million budget. So yeah, it definitely wasn't a hit. And they marketed the shit out of this movie. Trailers everywhere, TV spots, ads, interviews. But it just shows that if the audience is not interested, then they just won't see it, no matter how hard you try to push it. Which again is a shame, because I definitely think it's worth checking out. So yeah, it flopped, and it sucks that it did, but I understand why it did. Alright, now let's talk about one of the biggest upsets of 2021, Nightmare Alley. So Nightmare Alley is a remake of the 1940s film of the same name, directed by Guillermo del Toro. It follows a man who joins a circus and learns how to be a mentalist. Then he used these skills to con his way into the big city. Then after a series of events, he finds himself way in over his head, getting involved with the wrong people. Now from start to finish, this movie is just great. Visually it has a signature del Toro look. The story, albeit simple, is interesting enough to carry you throughout. And seeing Bradley Cooper's character's journey was really fascinating. Now, nearly every review of this film is glowing. Hell, it even got nominated for several awards. And seemingly everyone who's ever seen this movie usually has nothing but nice things to say about it. So it comes as a surprise that it only pulled in less than $40 million at the box office. The budget was $60 million, so it wasn't a catastrophic failure like others we've seen. But even given its smaller budget, it didn't even break even. Also surprising considering the names attached to it. Guillermo del Toro, Bradley Cooper, Willem Dafoe. Some high profile names. So what happened? Well, you see, this was late 2021. So this is still during the pandemic era where most movie theaters weren't really doing well anyway. So that's probably the biggest factor, but something else worth mentioning is that Nightmare Alley had the unfortunate luck of dropping the same weekend as Spider-Man No Way Home, which, as we all know, went on to be a massive success. So it was just completely overshadowed. So much so that I actually remember people talking about how their screenings of Nightmare Alley got canceled and rescheduled so that the theater can put more showings of Spider-Man in, which isn't unheard of actually. It happened during Endgame as well. So this is a more unique set of circumstances than others on this list, because it was released during a very unfortunate time period and on an even more unfortunate weekend. Alright, time to talk about one of my favorite directors, Guy Ritchie. He's no stranger to box office bombs. Hell, some of them happened recently, and some of which flopped undeservingly. Now, I had quite a bit to choose from, but the one I picked for today is The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Released back in 2015, this is an adaptation / remake of the show of the same name from the 60s. It's an espionage action spy thriller, starring Henry Cavill and Armie Hammer, as they play two rival spies forced to work together to save the world. Now, Guy Ritchie around this time period was in the habit of taking characters and shows that he loved and doing his own version of it basically, which initially led to two very successful Sherlock Holmes movies, and later he would take a stab at King Arthur. So coming off the hype of two very successful films, who's to say it wouldn't work again with this series? And on paper, it should have worked. It had talent, it had recognizable names, a director on a hot streak, but in practice it didn't do so hot, bringing in a little over $110 million on a $75 million budget. Now, Guy Ritchie does a great job at operating with mid-sized budgets. A lot of his films always seem to be punching above their weight class in terms of look, style, and production, which I guess is a good thing when they do underperform or flop like this one did. It means they don't lose hundreds of millions of dollars. So why did this one flop? It could be The Man from U.N.C.L.E. wasn't as popular or as recognizable as an IP, so it didn't get many people's attention off the bat. But then again, it wouldn't be totally necessary for people to even know what The Man from U.N.C.L.E. is to even have an interest in this, so that couldn't possibly be it. I do know marketing wise, this wasn't really pushed that hard at all. Like going off memory and from posts I can find from back in that time period, it seems no one remembers seeing trailers or ads for this, so it kind of just dropped and got forgotten about. But after doing some digging, I think I found an even bigger reason for why this didn't perform that well. It released only a couple weeks after Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, which was a much bigger film. So I think people just naturally gravitated towards that film franchise to get their action spy film fix. And Rogue Nation was pushed a lot harder than The Man from U.N.C.L.E. I vaguely remember to this day, 10 years later, seeing ads for this everywhere and people actually talking about it. Whereas The Man from U.N.C.L.E. just didn't have that same buzz or hype. It's like, yeah, I knew it was coming out, but I really liked Guy Ritchie, so I was already watching it anyway. At least that's my theory, but it kind of sucks because this was a fun Cold War era spy action film that was clearly setting up for a sequel, but as we all know, it never came. Now, Ridley Scott, much like Guy Ritchie, is no stranger to flops either. In fact, one of his biggest films of all time, the sci-fi classic Blade Runner, was a box office disappointment upon its release, but has gone on to be one of the most influential sci-fi films in history, which has a very long and wild story about its different versions. But even to this day, he directs and puts out movies. They do vary in quality, but one that completely bombed that shouldn't have was The Last Duel, a medieval drama about a woman getting assaulted and then her husband and the man who accused of the crime battling out to the death in a duel. Now, the big thing about this film that makes it such an interesting watch are the shifting perspectives between the three leads, and how certain events and encounters change depending on whose perspective you're following. There are gaps in the story that don't get filled in until later on, when it shifts to those POVs. And then of course you mix in the medieval European setting, the beautiful sets and locations, and it makes for a pretty fascinating viewing experience, though it wasn't viewed by very many people. Pulled in just $30 million on a $100 million budget. A complete and utter just failure at the box office. Again, the names attached to it are big. Adam Driver, Matt Damon, and Ben Affleck all involved, with Affleck and Damon actually being co-writers. Then of course you got Ridley Scott at the helm. This should have been a hit. So why wasn't it? Well, for starters, this was 2021. This was COVID era and not many films were doing that great. But like how I mentioned in the previous entry with Nightmare Alley, Spider-Man No Way Home came out at the end of the year and was a complete success. But not only Spider-Man, but Dune, No Time to Die, Fast 9, hell, even Halloween Kills and the Mortal Kombat movie did better than this. So yeah, COVID was a huge part of it, but maybe there's a few other things going on here. I mean, for starters, the marketing just was trash. Like, I'm a guy who actively follows movies, and I barely saw anything about this film. So I know if I'm barely seeing anything about it, the average motherfucker doesn't stand a chance. But the second theory I've been seeing float around for years at this point is that this simply isn't a film that appeals to a lot of modern day audiences. I mean, it's a 2.5 hour long medieval time period drama. And again, if you look at the biggest films of that same year, or hell, anytime in the past like 5 or 10 years, this type of movie just isn't as appealing to the modern audiences. Like, if this was released 20 years ago, it would have have been huge. But unfortunately it wasn't, and we're probably not going to see a film like this for a while. I don't think studios would be willing to spend $100 million on a movie that's going to make literally no money. And now, if I'm being honest, probably the only reason this film was even made is because it took the power of Ridley Scott, Ben Affleck, and Matt Damon to make it possible. And even then, it didn't do well. So, poor marketing, COVID era, and a film that doesn't appeal to a lot of people these days. I guess when you look at it that way, it wasn't exactly a recipe for success, which again is a shame because this was a fantastic film. And one I highly recommend people to sit down, lock in, and just check out.
Smaller people? Children. I lost the word there.
Alright, for this last entry, I want to talk about a film from one of the best directors of all time, Hugo. This might be surprising here considering it was nominated for over 11 Academy Awards, and is often regarded as one of Scorsese's best films, so it has the recognition. But when you sit back and look at the numbers, it actually did underperform. You see, it had a budget of between somewhere of 150 to 190 million, considering which sources you want to go by, and it only brought in 185 million at the box office. So yeah, even at the low end of the budget estimate, it still didn't do that well. But why is that? This is genuinely a fantastic movie that follows the story of an orphan boy living in a train station, befriending a girl and her godfather, and the power of cinema and how it can pull people together. It's a great watch and will forever be one of Scorsese's best films, I think. So there are a few reasons I dug up online to why it didn't do that well. I mean, for starters, this movie went way over its budget. Originally it was supposed to be around $100 million, but it landed somewhere way past that. So that greatly increased the risk and the amount of money it had to make to be successful. But another reason I saw floating around is that it was the marketing. It just didn't hit the right audience. You see, it was pushed as a kids film, so most teen and adult viewers possibly just lost interest. But as far as kids themselves, it didn't really appeal to them that much either. Sure, it had moments of humor and whimsy, but it features a lot of slower moments and more mature themes that would bore most younger viewers. So it just didn't hit the right audience. Hell, I remember being in my junior or senior year of high school when this came out, and even though I knew it was directed by Martin Scorsese, I didn't care to see it because I assumed it was just a kids movie. It wasn't until much later that I actually watched it and realized how wrong I was. I guess you could mention that it was shot for 3D, and maybe that turned some people away because they just saw it as a gimmick, but that one's really just kind of a guess. Now, Scorsese has had several flops throughout his very long career, and hell, one happened not long after Hugo in 2016 called Silence, which I will get to one day. Thankfully, Hugo has a newfound appreciation years later after its release, and rightfully so. It's an amazing film, and one I think everyone should check out.
How the fuck can you grin?
I think it's gonna about do it for the list. Honestly, I could have gone on much longer. This still happens to this day. Hell, as of recording, there are several films that just absolutely flopped at the box office that many people really enjoyed. And history has shown that this is just gonna continue to happen regardless. And usually it's always a combination of bad marketing, bad timing, or just some general lack of interest. If you can think of some more, go ahead and leave a comment down below. But I think that's about it. See ya.
Come on, girl, you got walkers all around you. They're in the woods.